meeting of IP Time. In the current world scenario, as a result of the pandemic, this morning we are focusing on the performing arts and more specifically on live music events that, as you probably know, have been and are still being hit very hard by the disease. However, such hardships are triggering the need to think to the future and to think of possible alternatives to cope with this pandemic while it lasts, and at the same time to think of how live music concerts will make their comeback once, hopefully, the pandemic is over. All such alternatives that might be considered will, of course, have legal implications, especially, but not exclusively, from a music and performers' right view. Nevertheless, this morning, our guest is not a lawyer, but a top-ranked executive who will contribute with valuable insights from the perspective of symphony orchestras management. These orchestras, as you may also know, are facing challenging times these days, to the point that some of them, their very existence, might be at stake. To help us to think about the future of live music concerts, I am delighted to introduce to you Kim Noltemy. Kim is at the helm of one of the major American symphony orchestras as president and CEO of the Dallas Symphony Association, which has under its wings the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. Prior to her current position in Dallas, Kim was Chief Operating and Communications Officer for other major symphony orchestras, the Boston Symphony and Boston Pops orchestras. In her current position in Dallas, Kim has already started to think, and most importantly, to implement outreach and digital strategies. So it will be of most interest to learn about them. Just a brief reminder to those who are newcomers to IP Time. Once Kim finishes her talk, you are welcome to send your written questions, preferably in English. If not, send them in Spanish, and I'll do my best to translate them as faithfully as possible. So Kim, thank you very much for being with us this morning, and we are looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you, Martin. It's an honor to be invited here today. So we're living in a very, very complicated times, as you all know. For the orchestra industry, it's particularly hard because not only do we have large audiences in our performing venues, but we also have usually 80 to 100 players on the stage. So we have to deal with the restrictions in gathering on both sides. So I think I'll first start with what we have been doing in Dallas since the pandemic started, which is similar to what other orchestras are doing, although I would say that we're probably one of the most active orchestras. And the reason for that is several different reasons, really. One is the restrictions in Texas by the governor are not strong compared to many other states in the United States. So that is both a good and a bad thing, because of course, more restrictions in many cases means you can stop the spread of COVID. But on the other hand, there's restrictions that are so strong, even in places that don't have a lot of COVID right now, are preventing them from actually being able to perform. So an example of that would be my former orchestra, the Boston Symphony, where they actually cannot have an audience at all in their building. That is not permitted. And so that they had to get special permission to have, I think now 50 players, 50 or 60 players to do a recording. So for us, we would not have to have any restrictions on how many players that we would have because they're our employees. However, we have restricted our orchestra to fewer than 40 people because we are respecting social distancing and our players must be 6 feet apart from each other as the authorities and medical community recommend. So, so what most orchestras started doing after the quarantine was over, and the quarantine time frame was different in different places. So in Texas, the quarantine ended at the beginning of May, but in other states, it went through June or maybe even early July. But when the players could play again, whether it was by management or the players wanting to do it themselves, they decided to do outdoor chamber concerts. And so we did a huge number because we had players who were wanting to do it on their own, and then we asked players to do it. So we had about, so far, 80 outdoor chamber concerts, free in the neighborhoods or in parks. And the reason we did this is to stay connected with our audience members. And so what would happen is we would talk to different people who are our supporters or subscribers and ask them, did they have a street where we could go play on their street and they could invite their neighbors? Or did they have a big driveway or front yard that we could play? And then we also worked with all of the parks that they created markings on the grass, like circles or squares where people had to sit with their families so that they were not near other people. So that's how we did the parks part of the concerts. We would usually have 3 or 4 players. Again, they would sit 6 feet apart and they would perform different types of music, and they loved it. They were so happy to be able to play because, first of all, every professional musician in this country, and I would say this is true of all musicians, their whole goal is only to play for live music. I mean, live people. They don't want to just be at home in their house and put it on the internet, although they did a lot of that too. So being able to be in the public and have the feedback, even if it's far away, even if there's noise outside of cars driving by, they were still happy with that. In addition to that, because we were permitted to use our venue, in September, we started with concerts. We changed the program of all the programs to make, instead of for 80 or 100 musicians, we made it for 30 or 40 musicians. And so we essentially did our season as usual, meaning if we had concerts before on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we're doing that same thing. The subscribers who purchase tickets, we're inviting them to come, but we're limiting it to 150 people per concert. So that means that every subscriber who bought tickets maybe will only come to 50% of their concerts because we have to take turns. And that has been working well. Of course, some people are upset because they can't come to every concert, but really there's nothing we can do about that. We had very, very strict protocols to make this happen. We hired a doctor to advise us on the situation. We reviewed it with our lawyers so that they could make sure that we would not be responsible for the liability if someone became ill. I'm not sure if all of you know, but orchestras in America are all union. And that means that I cannot just decide any that is, unless it's already in the contract. And obviously none of this kind of thing will be in the contract. So I had to negotiate a separate agreement with the orchestra for a few different things. Number one, I had to substitute concert services that were canceled for other services that they could implement for us. For example, the chamber music concerts that I talked about, that could be one thing that they could use to make up some of the hours. Another thing is they could make digital content at home. So special features for us or music that they could play, and all of that would count as, you know, fulfilling their hours that they owed to us. And the last piece is teaching. And teacher, we had 500 students that we were working with, providing free instruments and music lessons. And we had to make that all digital. We had to do it online. And so many of our musicians agreed to do the teaching instead of us having to hire separate musicians to teach. Because normally our musicians wouldn't have this time available. And so there were a few people in the orchestra who did not want to do any of those things. For example, someone who might be terrible with technology or not have good equipment at home, or someone who doesn't really like to go outside because they're very scared. They don't even want to go outside at all until the whole COVID situation is over. So a few of those people we had call our donors and call them and just talk to them. And one of those musicians, as an example, spoke to more than 200 donors for 1 hour each and just said, hello, how are you? Let me tell you what's going on. And just a kind of social, but of course covered some information about the Dallas Symphony. And the reason that was great at this time is so many older people were home alone and they didn't have a lot of people to talk to. So actually this worked out really well for both sides. So anyway, I had to negotiate this contract with the musicians to agree on doing this other extra work. And then I also had to get them to vote to agree to play starting in September with the new protocols. So they had to vote on if they agreed with what we put together. So we have COVID testing every day. We have it at our concert venue. We hire medical people to do it on site. And then we bring the results to the lab and we get the lab results it's an 8-hour test. So oftentimes we get the results in 10 hours or maybe 15 hours later. So we're always testing for tomorrow. And so before the rehearsal, we would call anyone who had a positive test and they would not be able to come in. We have not had all negative tests so far. So that's great news. Our musicians are very, very careful, so it's not that surprising. But we're also testing the stage crew. We're testing, I get tested every day, anybody who's backstage dealing with the musicians. So they have special places where to warm up where they're not near anyone. So the cleaning, brass players usually dump their instrument, the condensation on the stage. Now they have to put it in in a little bucket, and they have to be responsible for the bucket and take the bucket backstage and empty it and clean it. I mean, so this is very different for them. And there are plexiglass shields between brass and wind players because they have no masks on stage. Everybody else wears masks. All the guest artists obviously have to be tested and wear masks as well. And so it poses challenges for musicians because normally for an orchestra, you position the players so they're very close to each other. And that's how you make the best sound because you can hear each other and play together really well. So being separated by 6 feet makes it more challenging, but they're obviously adjusting. And we record every performance. That was another thing. I had to get their permission in the new contract to record every performance and either live stream it or release it 1 week later after we edit it. So it's been, they agreed to all that. It's been very cooperative. Our orchestra also agreed to a pay cut. We had to do pay cuts for our staff, of course, and we had to furlough some people. So the financial stress of this time has been very difficult, and our focus, because we cannot really rely on ticket revenue with only 150 people coming when the concert hall is 1,800 people. So the revenue has been cut by to 10% essentially. And so we have the reason part of the reason we're doing all of the outdoor concerts and making sure we have the videos and, you know, having people call donors and subscribers is to keep that strong connection. And we need that strong connection because we need that financial support from all of those people, because now we will have to have 90% of our revenue has to come from donations as opposed to before where it was about 60% had to come from donations. So it's a very difficult situation, but we feel strongly that we need to continue to play live music, because if we don't do that, the future will be bleak. And so I'll talk now about the future, which is, say, whenever this is over, I don't know if it's in 6 months, a year, or longer, but people will have become accustomed to not attending concerts because they've been staying in and not doing a lot of activity. They will be afraid of being in a space with a lot of people. And we have an older audience in general with average age closer to 60. And so I think it is a very, something we have to think about. How can we plan for the future? Because we're gonna have to find, if we wanna have a concert hall full of people, how will we do that? Is testing gonna be available on a big scale so that in the future, every single person coming into a concert is gonna get a fast test, a rapid test, and wait, and then if they're okay, they can come in? Are we gonna reduce, or are we gonna reduce the capacity of our venues and, you know, create maybe more of a social environment, meaning you can take out seats and put tables in and people could, you know, have wine or drinks during the performance, and they would be farther apart from each other because you would take out a lot of seats, but you would enhance the experience in another way. As difficult as the situation is for classical music, we are a business that is reliant on donations, and it's always been that way in the United States. So we have a certain number of people that are willing to pay, 10 times the price of a ticket each year to make sure that we can perform and have top quality artists, etc. So in one way, that's an advantage. On the other hand, we have an older audience, which this disease is much more dangerous for older people. And so how do you reconcile all of that? If you look at Broadway, or you look at like pop or rock type shows, the average age of attendees is much lower. And so in a way, the fear would be less. On the other hand, the crowds that, the attendance for those kinds of events has to be at full capacity, or they cannot make money on the shows. So just as an example, here we are at a concert hall in Dallas, and we're having concerts 4 days a week. And it's a very small audience, but still we're carrying on. Next door, there's a performing arts center where the opera performs, and traveling groups and visiting artists, and they cannot open because the cost of opening the venue, their model is a pure profit model. So if you can't make money on the event, you can't have the event. And we are not about profit. I mean, we wish we were making more than we are, but we're not about profit. So it's a very different scenario. And also, most American orchestras have an endowment, which is basically like a big savings account for times of crisis, and are able to get a bit more money from that in times like this. And there's the possibility that those endowments would have to go up, so that on an annual basis, orchestras could get more from their endowment into operating budget each year. So, I guess I'll just talk about the Dallas Symphony, because I can't really talk about other orchestras because everybody's in a different situation. The New York Phil announced they're not going back until next September. There are a handful of orchestras in this country who are just recording with no audience. And then there are, I think, 3 or 4 orchestras that have a very small audience. And that's essentially what's happening here. Europe, they were up to 300 and 400 people attending concerts. But I know in the Netherlands, they just got shut down. A curfew was just imposed in France, so that changes what they can do for concerts. And so I think the thing that we all understand is that we're not going to get to a point where we can have large audiences for quite some time, and maybe never, who knows. So for us, our plan is to really work on our digital content so that we can create an audience that will pay for concerts online. From March through September, we offered all of our content for free. And we had a lot of interesting concerts and speakers and all different things. And now we are still going to have a lot of features and speakers all for free, but we're going to charge $10 per view for our concert, or a membership fee for the year of $100, which I think is a very modest number, but if a lot of people do it, it works well for us. And so we'll begin a relationship with those people that will be different than the relationship we have with in-person audience members. An interesting statistic is the Metropolitan Opera in New York, which obviously has been doing movie theater concerts and other highly produced top level productions, has received, every time they put up a free concert, they received hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations for people. So people are supporting them in that way. For us, we don't have that level of a profile. So we believe we have to have the ongoing dialogue and connections with the people who decide to watch our concerts. I do believe that we will need to convert in our next contract some of our concert services to education and to other activities. And that could be just being out in the community, talking to people, doing lectures, all different things. And the reason I say this is I don't think in the near future we will see the volume of attendees no matter what. And we should therefore reduce the concert count, because you would not want to have concerts that people don't really want to buy tickets to, right? You need to actually only offer your very best that you know people will want to go see. On top of that, I think we'll need to have more concerts per program that's of interest. So right now we can have 3 or 4 concerts per program. But if we have a program like we do Star Wars movie concerts, those are very, very popular. They always sell out. Well, we can't have a sold out concert for a while, right? Maybe it's going to be 2 years, maybe it's going to be longer. So instead we need to do 5 or 6 of those same performances with fewer people at each one. Same thing if we had a Beethoven 9, would be very, very popular, would sell out. Well, we would not be able to do that. So we would have smaller numbers, but have more concerts of that program. Actually, the Beethoven 9 makes me think about the fact that we wouldn't be able to do Beethoven 9 because of the singers. And there's a lot of research available demonstrating that choruses are very dangerous. And so that's just a whole nother interesting thing, that you have to take all choral repertoire out of your performances for the next, at least year, which changes very much what we all do. And almost every orchestra has a chorus, a professional chorus or a volunteer chorus that works with them. So that's a whole nother thing that changes our activities. And then in general, I feel that we should plan for smaller orchestras, maybe not as small as right now, but I don't think we should be doing giant pieces of like Mahler or something that has, 125 players on stage, because while our players are all tested, it's still pushing the risks too much. So yeah, it's a really difficult scenario for pop and rock type groups. It's more about figuring out a way to make the cost structure lower to offset the reduced audience, and for those kind of promoters to have the discipline to limit the audience, because they've never had to do that and they don't have to worry about the public good. We have to worry about the public good because we're a not-for-profit and we get a tax break for worrying about the public good. That's the trade-off, the quid pro quo. So anyway, I don't know if I've answered, well, I'm sure you have lots of questions and I don't know if I've really covered everything you wanted, but maybe we should open it up for now. Martine, is that good?
That's perfect. And you have made very, very interesting remarks that will surely generate comments and questions. Here, Fabrizio Modica raises a very interesting question. And he says, how about drive-in concerts?
So actually, we're planning a drive-in concert in December. I think 2 other orchestras have had drive-in concerts. It's a very practical solution for sure. there's a lot of costs associated with doing it, which is, I think, the reason that orchestras haven't done it quickly as a solution, because there's the production piece of it. Whether you're live streaming your orchestra from somewhere else to the drive-in, or if you have a stage at the drive-in and your orchestra's playing, there are a number of different costs involved with that. And so, and also orchestras are very, very worried about doing a bad job with a new idea like that. So putting in the time to test and putting in enough money to make sure it all works well. But I do think in 2021, you will see a lot of drive-in concerts in the US, because that will be a safe way to have audience.
Here, Josefina asks, how successful have outdoor concerts been so far in your experience with the Dallas Symphony?
I mean, I think they're very successful from an audience perspective, because basically you're bringing the musicians to the audience, and in a time when people are very concerned about going outside of their comfort zone and the places that they know and the people who they know, bringing concerts to the neighborhoods is great. If you're going to a park, you're usually only reaching the people who typically go to that park, you know, so it's not, and not a lot of marketing is being done because you don't want too many people there, right? It's the opposite of how we typically work. We usually want more new people, as many people as possible, and now we want, oh, please, no more than 40. That would be bad if we had that. And how do we even control and make sure those 40 people wear their masks and stay away from each other? And we feel that that's our responsibility. So yes, successful, but modestly so, in that the audience expectations are pretty low.
You mentioned earlier about this new business model of webcasting your concerts on the internet. Two questions here. Are you planning to broadcast worldwide or with geo-blocking? And the second question is, did you have to renegotiate the agreement with the performing rights societies like ASCAP or BMI for this specific business model?
So our content is available worldwide. We would not limit it. That would not be beneficial. Especially our music director is from Italy and performs widely in Europe, so he has a following there. We wouldn't want to create a situation, and the reality is we have to pay anyway. We have to pay certain rights. Right now, rights are waived because of COVID, but in the future, we have to pay the rights based on worldwide. There's no, they haven't created a model where it's just your area. So, and then for ASCAP and all the other licensing, we have blanket licensing deals with them. So yeah, we, as part of what we're doing, and you know, I think we have a little bit of an up payment we have to make, which we're making. We are able to negotiate with our own union, but all of the other rights organizations, there's not very much possibility to negotiate with them, unfortunately, because I mean, that is their business model, right? Getting paid for, and they are not really, they want it to happen, but they're not going to give us a better price to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, until the pandemic, the concerts of the Dallas Symphony at your home venue, were they transmitted outside? I mean, by internet, TV, or radio?
Yes, on radio, and No, internet, yes, periodically. So maybe like 2 concerts per season or something more previously. What we did during the pandemic is install a system with robotic cameras in a control room and a fiber optic cabling so that we no longer have to hire outside broadcast companies or film crews to
Mhm.
come in. We have all of that now, so we can do it. Now we can do it as much as we want. Financially, we can afford to. The orchestras waived the fees during COVID, so we can take advantage of that. But what we can't do is get a break on the licensing of the music.
Okay. I remind the participants that we are waiting for your questions in English or in Spanish. Um, Kim, I remember that the Boston Symphony and Boston Pops, they have a very huge um, archive of recordings. Does the DSO also has some kind of archive that you can exploit, sorry, in this pandemic online for online viewing, of course, with a previous payment?
We don't actually, we didn't have very much archived at all. This orchestra, the DSO, is very behind in technology before I got here, and we're trying to catch up, which is, so we're at a disadvantage compared to orchestras like the New York Philharmonic or the Boston Symphony. And so we're essentially building an archives. We've always had a good audio archives, but never a good video archives.
Okay, Marcelo Garcia Sellard is asking, are you planning to start your own OTT system or service for distributing your contents?
No, well, I mean, I guess that's I'll explain what we're doing, and it's a little bit of that, but we're selling it on our own platform so that we get all the information that, the registration and all that. It is being served up, our video is being served up on Vimeo. So
Mm-hmm.
Vimeo offers the platform where you can actually sell and retain the actual data, but they will manage your content distribution. And the reason that that's helpful is, for example, if we had, 10,000 people live streaming at once, or we had some, piece of content that went viral, if we were hosting it on our own servers, we wouldn't have the capacity. It would crash. Actually, we had that with the Boston Symphony at one point when I was there. We had it all done ourselves and everything. And then once something became really popular, the whole system crashed. And we use, obviously cloud data companies to ramp up and ramp down, but it was too unpredictable, and we're not professionals in that area, so we don't really know how to monitor how to increase the bandwidth at the right moment in time. And so we've just decided to subcontract that piece out.
Good. Josefina Viacaba asks, what is happening with those orchestras that are not performing? Are they getting any help from the government?
So most orchestras in the United States applied for the PPP loan, the Payroll Protection Program. That money was available in the spring, and any business with fewer than 500 people could apply for that. Now, 500 people is part-time and full-time, so several orchestras in the United States couldn't apply for that. Boston Symphony was one, Chicago Symphony, LA Phil, but the rest of us got that loan. That loan was structured to cover payroll for 2 months. And So most people used all the money in 2 months because, you know, it was designed to stop layoffs and all of that. So what happened after that money ran out is three American orchestras shut down completely. The Nashville Symphony, Indianapolis, and Portland, Oregon. And it's very scary to the rest of us because we don't know if those orchestras are going to come back. I mean, there's a couple of administrative staff, but the orchestra itself is completely laid off. Most other orchestras in the country, there's no other money available right now. If a new stimulus package becomes available, we'll all apply. There's a Save Our Stages, that legislation called Save Our Stages. Would apply to orchestras, but all performing arts, so theater, but it would be very, very important for live music in this country because the scenario I talked about where the venues cannot operate unless they can make a profit, which means there's hardly anything that they can book even when COVID is over if the audience limitations stand. So Save Our Stages would give every organization a proportional grant to cover the cost of their venues, which would be a huge thing for this country and would allow performing arts to at least get through another year. I think that we're going to see a situation in not just, I mean, I don't know about orchestras because we, again, have the philanthropic, we have the donation side. So, you know, there's always, you know, in each market, a donor that doesn't want to see their orchestra die and they give enough to kind of keep it going. And that is not necessarily healthy from a financial perspective, but it's enough to keep it going. The government would have to give an amount that would allow reduced audiences for another year to be financially viable on a basis of equality, right? So you can't just give the venue that does rock shows more money than you give, you know, the venue that does orchestras or ballet or theaters. So we're all lobbying for that and we hope it comes through. That's the only potential package right now that could help the arts in the United States.
It's interesting that you mentioned the word loan. That means that you have to repay to the government this money that they advance to you.
Yes, well, they are offering loan forgiveness if you meet certain criteria. And originally they weren't, but now that the situation has continued. So I would say that 80% to 90% of all of those loans will be forgiven.
Okay.
And so I think we're all happy about that.
No, sure. Here, Margarita asked a question, but more from a human side, which is also very interesting because after all, you are a large human group. She's asking if this pandemic and these unseen changes have meant any kind of more proximity, more empathy between musicians and between orchestra staffs and musicians.
That's an excellent question. And yes, in most orchestras, the connection between the staff and the orchestra has increased dramatically in a positive way because we all have to work together to get through this period. Obviously, in the orchestras where everything was shut down, there's a different feeling because I think if you're a musician and you spent your whole life trying to, you know, auditioning and getting better to do that job, and then it's just shut down in one day, there's a very negative feeling about that. And that was controlled by management, even though management would say it was impossible to avoid. So I think that probably like 60 or 70% of the orchestras are seeing it coming together more closely. And the other is, again, orchestras feeling like management is not thinking about them or committed to them cutting their salary or refusing to start, playing anything for fear about liability or something like that.
Mm-hmm. There is one issue that wasn't entirely clear to me. Maybe I missed a point. When you mentioned that you had to renegotiate the agreements with the musicians union, um, I mean, until the pandemic, you probably had an agreement that allowed the orchestra to use an X number of hours per week for rehearsal and concerts. Now that you are not doing those rehearsals and concerts, I mean, not at least in the way you did it previously, these new job opportunities that you are using, that meant that you compensated uh, the former hours with this new use of the hours, or you have to pay a part in addition to those hours because these are people under a salary.
So all of the musicians are on a salary, and even though we canceled concerts, they still got their salary. When we were working through the new contract negotiation, we just did a one year, so it's not permanent. It's just to get through this period. We basically said you got paid for services, but we had no services. So we need you to make up the services in the way I described, whether it's education or chamber music out in the community. And so essentially they're volunteering for all of that because they already got paid to do it. But we're keeping track so we know if they're making up the hours. So it's like a bank of hours that were already paid for. And now
Okay.
taking that. What I'm talking about for the future, potentially, is the idea that we may change the configuration of concerts. So instead of, we have 8 or 9 services a week. That's how it works. So you can use 5 for rehearsal and 3 for concerts, or you could use 3 for rehearsal and 5 for concerts. There's some rules, but generally, just to keep it simplified, that's how it works. And what I'm thinking in the future is that we may have to say, okay, we have 8 or 9 services, and every week 1 service is education, or 2 services are education. And, then the rest could be either rehearsal or concerts, or 2 services are for whatever the Dallas Symphony needs, and we won't define it, but we have the right to ask every week for orchestra members to do other things, which we would have to outline. They won't, it's a union, so they're not going to allow it to just be nebulous. We actually have to discuss, what would these other things be? What would the parameters of these things be? We can't just say, you'll do anything we say, because they definitely won't agree to that. So I have to be very specific, and you could be doing this or this or this, and how much notice do I have to give? I have to tell you 1 week in advance that that's what you're doing, or, the orchestra contracts are unbelievably specific, because there's a 5-week schedule, a 1-week schedule, and if I don't put something on the 1-week schedule right now, we can't do it without a vote of the whole orchestra, which you just wouldn't do. So who knows, when you start talking about changing like the basic concepts, in all likelihood, the contract's going to get even more pages. Like it's already like 75 pages. It'll be like 100 pages after that.
Okay, so if those hours that you have already paid in those bank of hours, for instance, some of those hours mean a streaming concert, that would be already paid, okay?
That's more complicated question because there's the national union that dictates the rules on all the media stuff.
Okay.
So there's a group that negotiates with them, and they gave us special agreements during COVID for media. And then the local group obviously has to follow those, but if they agree on their own, it's helpful because that means they're happy about it, and they understand the importance. So in putting together a new contract, which I will have to work with the musicians on next summer, the media stuff is really the national, so it's a separate item. I can talk with my musicians about, well, I really need your help with this, that, and the other thing. But, and they can say, yes, we want to help you. But in the end, the national contract will tell me if I get it for free or I don't, or what the rules are.
Okay. Some orchestras, especially the British orchestras, but I think some American orchestras at least did it in the past, as an extra revenue, they can be hired for film music, to record film music. I remember that the BSO did it with John Williams some years ago for, I think it was Schindler's List. Probably you were there at that time. Has the Dallas Symphony done any such jobs, or are you planning maybe to do some recordings upon request?
It's been a long time since we have done any project like that. We would like to, and I have, certainly kind of presented ideas to various people in the industry in hopes that that could happen. The cost of an orchestra like the BSO is usually much higher than one like the Dallas Symphony because the hourly rates are lower. So hopefully that could be a possibility when we're at especially because we're performing now and we're kind of ahead of a lot of others on performing. But so yes, I would love to do it, but I have not found any interested party yet, but I will continue to work on it.
Well, we can do some marketing from here.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Here, Agustina Laboró. Agustina is a lawyer, is a legal consultant at the Teatro Colón here in Buenos Aires. She's asking something that you have tackled, but maybe you wish to expand on that. She is asking, are musicians receiving extra pays for their online performances in addition to the monthly pay?
So no, they are not right now. Because of the COVID, side letter to the contract, essentially, both the national and the local. In the future, we expect that, yes, we will have to pay an additional payment. Obviously, from our perspective, we would prefer something that was kind of an annual stipend that we knew we could manage the costs and it wouldn't stop us from doing extra online projects, because if it's a per project, that will create a scenario we'll probably say, is it worth for us to do this? It depends on how many people are going to watch it. And that would dampen our ability to grow our online audience if we had to think of it that way. So in the future, that should be the case. And in the past, that was the case prior to COVID. So hopefully we can come to agreement on something that's reasonable on that front.
Great. We have only 5 minutes more. Kim, how many staff depend from the Dallas Symphony in total, considering the musicians and the other staff?
So full-time is about 140. Part-time is another, 25 or 30 people.
And you probably have, like many symphony orchestras have, a lot of volunteers.
Yes, we do have a lot of volunteers. A lot of the part-time staff are in jobs like ushers and things like that, which is not very active right now, but will be when we are having larger crowds.
Good. Two people here are saying, Agustina is saying, thank you very much for your answer. And Margarita says, it's a pleasure to listen to your talk. So there are two people participating here. Here, Beatriz is saying, wonderful activity. So guys, if there are not any more questions, or Kim, if you maybe you wish to add something that you deem it's worth to add, please do it. We still have some 4 minutes. Here, sorry, Josefina says, congrats on how creative you have been to overcome difficulties. So you have a really a lot of fans here. You're making a lot of fans, Kim.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I guess I would just conclude with saying, as difficult as this has been, and we would never wish for anything like this to happen, obviously. No. It has had the effect of, one, allowing us and forcing us to be more creative. And in the orchestra business, that wasn't encouraged so much because of the restrictions of the contract and all of that, and financial risk. And now it's an environment where you really have to try things out to see what will work and not work. And the flexibility, again, both on the musicians and the staff side, is so critical. And I would have said that both those things, the creativity and the flexibility, were important for orchestras to succeed in the long term and thrive regardless of COVID. So this is now pushing those much harder and making it a top priority. And also the last piece is the people who watch concerts now have a different level of appreciation for this because it has been taken away from them. So I think that's a really interesting situation that we would not have thought about.
Do you think that chamber music will be somehow rediscovered or more, or deemed in higher demand because of the difficulties of assembling a large ensemble these days?
I do, and I think a lot of people who never listened to chamber music in their lives have now heard chamber music, whether it's online or in person, across America. And that is a really, really good thing, I think, because we need that flexibility, right? It can't always be the giant orchestra, and we can be more nimble, flexible, available if we can have different size ensembles. I see their hand. Do you see that, Andrea?
Excuse me?
Someone raised their hand on the screen.
Oops, sorry. Oh, says Monica says, congratulations, Kim and Martin, for the excellent event. Monica says also excellent. Beatriz says as well. Kim, once again.
Andrea Thompson has.
Oh, sorry.
Raised.
I haven't seen her. Sorry. Andrea, yes, go ahead. I cannot see. Can you see it, Beatriz?
Hello. Hi, my name's Andrea. Hi, thank you for all the explanations. It's been really wonderful to be able to be here. Thank you, Martin, for having invited me.
Mhm.
And I would like to ask a question. I think I actually just wrote it in the chat. How do we how do we give credits to a work for hire orchestra when you did the negotiation through a third-party conductor? So I never really talked to the conductor of that orchestra specifically.
Well, so it's a, yeah, so I only really talked today about a full-time orchestra with administration. There are many, many models of the opera here in Dallas is you know, I think it's a 20-week orchestra, and then there are many that are even smaller, fewer weeks. Oftentimes, the conductor doesn't want to be involved in those negotiations, so it all depends on if that person wants to be involved and the structure of the organization. But there's always a committee chair for any group, and that's really the person that is being negotiated with. And I think that just giving the proposal to that person, whether it's from the music director, administration, or even some volunteers are, you know, doing that negotiation. So Andrea, I'm not sure if I quite answered your question. So if you want to clarify, I can discuss further.
Okay. Yes. Actually, it is kind of confusing because I had never done that before. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm not a musician, but I you know, been thinking of you know, doing this, like hiring somebody, you know, like a body of musicians to do that. And I think that's a very interesting thing for musicians to do right now, to cooperate and collaborate. And it's just an idea. And thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, once again, Kim, thank you so much for sharing your time and most of all your knowledge with us. And really appreciate it personally also. So thank you very much. And Beatriz, I think we are over now.
Yes, I want to thank him again. It was very interesting, a world that we don't usually know about. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Take care, Kim.
You
So,
too, Martin.
bye-bye. Nice
Good
to
to
meet
see
you.
you.
Good to see
Goodbye,
you.
goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.